perhaps if there is a feminine aspect at all, it's about just letting go of this idea that the mind knows the way forward. Sometimes it's just, it doesn't know at all.
Welcome to Simply Always Awake, the channel where we talk about awakening, non-duality, and all related topics, including shadow work. One of the things we do here is, which is pretty new, is we have panel discussions. The first panel discussion was a couple of months ago. It was LTGB and awakening. It was a really nice discussion. Today's panel discussion I've been very excited about. It is entitled The Feminine Aspects of Enlightenment. And I have 5 wonderful humans here to discuss this with me. And I think I'll just introduce or have everybody introduce themselves one by one, and just state your name and let us know a little bit about yourself just by way of introduction. It doesn't have to be a biography, but just give us a little something about even what's going on with you right now, however you feel is relevant at the moment. So let's start with Chris.
Oh, hi. So my name is Chris Guimond, and I live in Montreal, Canada. I have a family of 4 adult children. I also have a granddaughter. I work as a awakening guide, and I also am a TRE facilitator, which is a self-help modality to help people with processing trauma and regulating the nervous system. Yeah.
Let's go to Barb.
Hi, I'm Barb Sullivan, and I live in Oregon. I am fairly new to the whole non-duality thing. The major shift happened 3.5 years ago, and so I found non-duality and began learning, and it all fit. And so I moved along with that, and it's been quite an adventure.
Thank you, Barb. Let's go to Lisette.
Hi, my name is Lisette Larkins. I live in Malibu, California. Since a child, I began opening to paranormal experiences, including surprisingly extraterrestrial contact phenomena with enlightened beings, and I spent then many decades trying to sort that out and understand and comprehend what that had to do with me, or in fact, humanity. I have a new book out this year about that, and I'm currently now working on a book that has to do with the intriguing yet little known topic and how common it is with respect to intimacy abuse as it relates to femininity in awakening, which is interesting because normally we consider awakening to happen in the peace of the moments and the wonder of the moments. And it does. And sometimes it happens in extreme, challenging environments, particularly in those that we are learning to face and clear through our shadow, which is what these difficult situations serve to bring to us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's go to Chelsea.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Muth in Virginia in the States, and I'm a developmental psychologist and mentor in the field of non-duality and awakening. I don't really even know what title to put on that, but it's distinct from the psychotherapy I do. And I'm a mom. And I don't know how to describe the process here of awakening. I guess I've been on a path, but not, and it found me. And part of my path has been disability and neurological disabilities. So that kind of experience of not having any control over the mind, and the ways that that's been an adventure in unraveling the aliveness here. So yeah, it's beautiful to be here with this panel. I feel very privileged and honored, and thank you so much, Angela.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa. Been teaching non-duality for 12 years now, or pointing to non-duality for 12 years. I started teaching in my late teens and originally got into Buddhism, and then found my way to non-duality and went on a mad spiritual search through my 20s.
Thank you. Okay. And the only other thing I wanted to ask is try to remember to pause yourself when you're not speaking so that when someone is speaking, we don't get little clips of other sounds and so forth. All right. Well, let's go to the first question. And when I ask these questions, answering them and please answer them in whatever way intuitively feels meaningful to you. You don't even have to answer it as such. Just answer maybe whatever comes, whatever seems reasonable, meaningful, relevant, or pass. Either one's fine. So the first question is, what role did the feminine aspect play in some or most of your transformative moments in the awakening process?
I would say the feminine aspect to me is the love part of awakening. And I'm sure everybody has different interpretations, and for some people, that's not the way it is. And so in non-duality, that would be more the side of being, more the side of everything, rather than the sort of more emptiness, the nothing. And what role did it play? I found the love side easier. There's some people, I think, have more of an attraction to the emptiness, and some people have more of an attraction to the love, and some it's mixed. And for me, the love side was a lot easier. And I think that's even what drew me to non-duality or to Buddhism, was the idea of love and compassion. And also when I would listen to teachers speak, it was like I would feel that love like expand in my heart. And that was what drew me often to that, or meditation was the love side. So that would be the like one of the parts or roles. And I think that profoundly affected my whole spiritual path, like that focus on love. Like if you're more focused on emptiness, it's maybe slightly different, but mine was certainly driven by love all the time. That was all I ever wanted, was love.
Thank you. Anyone else relate to that? Or have your own response?
I think for me it was, if that can be called the feminine aspect, I don't know. I think for me it was the being drawn to the love, the feeling, the aliveness, the unity. So I'm not sure how that relates to feminine aspects. I don't know.
Thank you. Any other takers?
It's interesting, the question about love, or so-called the seeking of love. I think for me, it seemed to be, if you could say, almost the absence of love that really drove my seeking, because even as a child, it seemed difficult to comprehend why fear seemed to be the predominant emotion, not only around me in the world and even in school as a child, sometimes even within my own family. But it seemed that love, seemed to be absent. And yes, of course, there was a desire for love. And yet, ironically, it was the absence of love that really seemed to propel me on this path, including a deep longing and asking, clearly, I don't know the way, so show me the way. I cannot know the way to find peace and equanimity, so show me what that way would be. And interestingly enough, I think it was Mohandas Gandhi who said that a coward is incapable of exhibiting love, that is the prerogative of the brave. And what I came to learn was that if in fact about 75% of the world's population is in the beginning part of their development from the perspective of their soul's development, then what we're talking about is the majority and the vast majority of the world's population is not in touch with love, but they're in touch with fear. Another way of saying that would be cowardice, but the way that cowardice shows up is fear, and how that shows up is through all of the behaviors and characteristics that would seem to be the antithesis of love. So then how do we all navigate that? How do we navigate that so-called intimacy abuse in the context of our relationships, our personal relationships, our families, our homes, but also that speaks to the lack of love with respect to our communities and even our greater nation states. So we're all coming to the experience within a population context of fear and some degree of so-called intimacy abuse because love is absent, because fear is more present. So this is really such an important topic, because how can we open our hearts and expand and explode open our highest idea of ourselves and of everyone else within a context where there doesn't appear to be love? So that's kind of how I came to it myself.
Thank you. Chelsea or Chris, do you have any response?
Yeah, I'll add. I think for me, it's kind of hard to be specific, but just the sense, because part of me identifies with having been on a path, but by and large, I wasn't seeking this. It just kind of came into my life, and so there's a very big intuitive component for me that feels very feminine, of maybe that being, if anything, of the feminine aspect leading just every step of the way, like life revealing what the intuition is pointing to and feeling invigorated by and stripping away. And it's for here, it's almost like the clearing of everything in the way of life mentally and through identification and through separation. Like once that's cleared and settled, then it's just undeniable love. And I would say for myself on a personal level, like becoming a mother was a very big part of death here of identity and what I was going through at the time, and really radically reorienting and realizing what love is when it's not attachment, when it's not conditional, when it's the fabric of everything. And so, yeah, here for me is a very interwoven experience with intuition and love.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I'll say that the initial awakening for me, I don't really see it, from the view of, the feminine, but I will say post-awakening, let's say that identification with the role of the mother, right? And in that role, dealing with a difficult situation of a child that was struggling with, a life-threatening drug addiction, the desperation of that in the role of the mother, so desperate to try to resolve that, it really helped to blow out a lot of the shadow, the identification, the beliefs about being the mother with the child that needed help. A lot of identity got resolved in that appearance of the role of the mother in just an astoundingly beautiful way.
Beautiful. Yeah, I guess I have a couple of follow-up questions for anyone, but the first one I thought of was when Lisa was describing sitting with a teacher, listening to this transmission, whatever it is, and feeling so much love and feeling it in the heart. Was there a devotional aspect for you of this process that was helpful, and or a problem? Like, was there a hindrance to a devotional aspect? I was curious about that, if Lisa might want to answer that, or if anyone else does.
Yeah, totally. I didn't realize that I was doing what they would call in India as bhakti yoga. But yeah, totally, there was devotional aspect to it. But I think I was also afraid of it. So, like when I first met Gengaji, just was so super in love with her. I could just felt so much love and just thought she was such a beautiful woman. And I didn't actually have the money to, go to America. I was a student at the time and, go to retreats. But I think I had a pulling away from that and purposely went to more male teachers because that was so scary. It was like, I was so vulnerable, like feeling that amount of love for one human being. Like the truth is, it's not that human being. I was resonating with what was beyond that, but I kept muddling it and seeing it in the form and then not in the form. So it was getting muddled, and I didn't come from a bhakti teaching path or a devotional path. So I didn't really know it or understand it. It wasn't until years later that I understood it more. So the hindrance, I would say, would be the mistaking it for the human form. So for me, like mistaking it with Gengaji and then maybe projecting mother stuff or romantic stuff onto her. And then not having or not knowing that it was actually what was beyond that, not really having a strong knowing. It was the beyondness that I was really falling in love with. So I think it's hindrance and positive, like in the way we can't ever define what's hindrance and what's positive, because the positive was that I wasn't really ever listening to teachers from a very mindy place. I was always really listening from the heart. And then there was the intellectual stuff that was coming. And I was understanding things and sort of doing netty of like, not this, not that. But then, the love bhakti was there. Like a lot of people say, you have to have the bhakti and the jnana, the wisdom yoga together, the love and the wisdom together. But I can see there's so many pitfalls in all paths, but at the same time, is it really pitfalls? Can we really have pitfalls? Like if you make a mistake, it's like the more that we make mistakes, the more we learn and grow.
Yeah, I think what you just said relates to what Chris said in some sense, that that powerful drive of motherhood was also what helped break through the identity. Chris, I'm curious about that. I was going to ask a follow-up question to what you said as well. When you described that strong mothering energy and mothering role, I was just wondering if you could break down a little bit how that, did it hit its limit and you realized there was something beyond it? Is that how it kind of challenged you at the level of identity, or how did that play out?
It was seeing it as, I'm going to say it as a force of nature, that it wasn't personal to me the way I had thought of, but just life moving through me, life taking care of itself. That's how I came to see it. And I even, interestingly, I started to realize, that what I would call like that mother energy, I started to realize I could see it in men as well.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I have another question here. How would you define the feminine aspects of enlightenment, or the feminine aspects of your experience? Or how do you perceive that energy? Are they distinct from masculine aspects? Or are these distinctions ultimately transcended? Another way of saying it is, do you think there's a value to orienting toward masculine or feminine, and or is there a point where those really become either interpenetrated or non-dualistic?
From my perspective, from the false sense of self, awakening happens as a result of seeing through every false illusion, every false identity, every false sense of self. All of this has to be seen through. From my experience, when a certain threshold of that clearing occurs, in my case, I was able to then kind of cross through and see the truth of me, the truth of myself, or that there is really no self. So whether or not that was from the feminine or masculine aspect, I perhaps when one has a clearer identification from the perspective of identifications with the feminine aspects, meaning leaning more towards so-called care, leaning more towards seeing the importance of others as important as self, which of course mothering and fathering, also parenting, would seem to develop. But as all of these false identifications have to be seen through. And of course, even after so-called awakening, that continues. That doesn't just stop. Even though the Feder model suggests that that the path stops, in my experience, it just becomes more and more subtle as this road is continued, and finer aspects, and looking at finer and subtler aspects of the shadow are able to now arise and be seen in full view. And many of those, if we're looking at that from the perspective of the evolution of the soul, and I can't separate that out. From my own experience and having experienced what I've seen through near-death experiences and through my paranormal experiences, I cannot separate out a lifetime in and of its own experience. The soul has had from my experience, multiple incarnations, and even Adyashanti talks about, as he awakened suddenly, many of his significant traumatic life experiences from other lives passed before his consciousness. They had to be seen through. And so as those are seen through, this is why nowadays in this time of we're seeing a speeding up of awakening, and it's happening in a balancing, almost in a combination with an arising of the shadow. So we have these two beautiful dynamics happening at once, because if everything is a perfection without judgment, and we can see clearly, we see that the arising consciousness is happening and the arising in shadow is happening all at the same time. So if that's really the case, then what is going on? What is happening with respect to the responsibility of each individual person to really look now at clearing their shadow? And so for women worldwide who are working, and men who are more in touch with their feminine aspect, particularly, who are looking now at their own shadow and attempting to use many spiritual practices available to have that shadow be known and seen through, and to be able to clearly behold it without flinching, which is what it's all about. Just to behold the shadow without flinching and to clear it without reacting. As that occurs, we're going to find that, isn't it an amazing coincidence that so many people around the world are actually incarnating in their family dynamics or in their work dynamics or in their community dynamics with individuals who there is either a history of intimacy abuse, because remember, it has to be seen through now in order to awaken. And so all of these relationships are so potent. They're so potent and in some cases so agonizing, because they are pointing to us. They're pointing our shadow to us so that it can arise, and be cleared. And so these are beautiful opportunities. It's not about being frightened of it or being afraid of the dynamic that we see. It's about recognizing that both are happening and arising at the same time, And our responsibility is to behold our shadow without flinching and to clear it and help others to do the same.
Wonderful. Thank you. Barb or Chelsea, do you have anything to say on the subject?
I'll share something if Barb is not jumping in. Yeah, something, a thread of what Lisette was just saying, of like both and arising at the same time. Like there's a clarity around like when there's truly an awakened being you're in the presence of, like the masculine and the feminine are both so readily available. And to me, I guess I would define the feminine broadly, but just like even from like a biological perspective of like feminine aspects of holding and receiving, masculine aspects of penetrating, going forth, being strong. And in awakening, like we just become more and more intimate with life. So it's this like very intimate, like in the way that physical intimacy happens, like, but within one person where we're open to when life is asking us to penetrate, go out, be strong, use the intellect, assert, and then on a dime it can flip into like the compassion, the connection, the receptivity. It doesn't feel like there's a box in any direction. It just becomes very fluid. And I think that hooks into what Lisette was beautifully saying of like, yeah, and then on the macro level, like it's the awakening in the shadow and the light and the dark. And this is all such a mystery, but it feels like when we really, stop resisting, then all the multifaceted aspects of our experience just are unfiltered and available to us. So I think that there can be a tendency to box feminine aspects into feminine people and masculine to masculine, but that doesn't feel true here.
Thank you.
Yes, I would say, relating to what Chelsea said, that all makes sense. I think it seems to me perhaps what we're trying to say is the feminine aspect maybe is being more in touch even through your conditioned self with your feelings and emotions. And I really feel like the sensations and the emotions and all that are perfect opportunities all the time to look inside, to look beneath those and wonder, what's that coming from? What's underneath that? And what's underneath that? So it gets you through the false, closer to the true. And maybe that's women have more conditioning in the regard of being open to that. I don't know.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question on the back of what Lisette said of the other panelists, because I've had a conversation with everyone here along the lines of no self-realization or anatta, however you might describe that. And Lisette mentioned that that's not the end of realization or not the end of the unbinding, unfolding. I find that to be totally true. And the way she described it is it just gets subtler and subtler. I'm wondering if anyone else wants to just speak to that, like in your own experience, because I think a lot of people misunderstand this, that the self illusion is seen through, and it's like there's nothing left to do, or like you're finished somehow. But I would say it doesn't seem to play out that way. I'm just curious what anyone else wants to say about that.
I'd say it is totally opposite than that. That's when the adventure really begins. And then everything that happens and comes is interesting and exciting and holds so much more than we think it does.
Yeah, I love it.
So it's just like coming alive, being plugged in for the first time in your life to the source, to the energy. It's
beautifully stated. Yeah. Lisa? Or anyone?
I was so enjoying what Barb was saying. I think it's Barb or Barbara. Barb.
Yeah.
But I kind of forgot what the question was.
Like, so after the realization of no self, or however that lands for you, seeing through that illusion of the separate self, however, Lisette pointed to the fact that, or to her experience, that it's not the end necessarily. There's a subtler and subtler seeing of shadow conditioning and so forth. That's the way she said it. Barb said it a sort of different way. But I was curious your experience of that, because I just see people being kind of confused about it, I think, who haven't experienced that.
So the way that I would say it is, I wouldn't quite say it in those terms. My way of saying it would be that there is no point of, to me, there's no point of where awakening can start or stop in the human. Like, so when the form always has the possibility to expand. So why would that stop at the personality? You know, so we have the awakening, and that's like a profound change. And some, like, a lot of stuff might fall away in that, or a lot of stuff might get activated by that. But the human form will endlessly expand to incorporate that realization, because it seems like the nature of life is like an endless expansion and everything is growing. So why would the person stop growing after that realization? So I would totally agree that after the shift or the realization, or whatever we call it, like the embodiment of that will go on endlessly. Like, we can't really on the human level arrive. We can only arrive in a way on the absolute level. Like, that is like this, and that's final, and that's like, that doesn't move the absolute level, but the human will always move and expand. And so I suspect that the human will become more loving, more open, more compassionate, more, you know, as all the ideas and beliefs begin to crumble.
Thank you. Chris or Chelsea?
I think one of the most fascinating things to consider is that we're having this conversation in the context of, we're living in a patriarchal society. You know, the planet is set up right now as a patriarchal dominated society. Is that changing? Maybe it is. But, and this is not just my idea. Stanislav Grof, a Czech-born American psychiatrist with more than 60 years of experience, and considered to be one of the developers of transpersonal psychology, and has 60 years of research into this whole idea of non-ordinary states of consciousness. He talks about this kind of idea of cycles of influence from a perspective of astronomy, or, you know, oh my gosh, astrology. So, for example, just bear with me for a second. One of the things he says is, the thinking underlying astrology suggests that in the universal scheme of things, the movements of the planets and the geometrical aspects they are making are correlated with the hidden archetypal dynamics that shape the events in the phenomenal world. And how this relates to what I am seeing is that this year, this summer, particularly this fall, there were some changes from an astronomical standpoint, literally, that haven't happened in 2,000 years. And that shift from what I have been shown shows this. And it's extremely important to comprehend and to really be able to behold without flinching, once again, is that from my understanding, the shift now is that for those who have not dealt and looked at their arising challenge of their own shadow, that shadow is arising more fully now. And we're seeing that worldwide. We're seeing that as some democracies fall into fascism. We're seeing that worldwide with interesting, seemingly arising in battles and conflicts worldwide. And so the thing to know about that is that as this present patriarchal shadow which has an opportunity from an individual perspective to look at the arising shadow and to deal with it and to move it through. If that has been ignored up to this point, it will pull a person further into the shadow. And what's interesting is that for those who are working now almost at a crossroads, those who are not looking at their own shadow work will also be drawn further into that awakening, or we could say expanding shadow. And so the reason why these conversations are so important at this time is because I think many heterosexual relationships, or even doesn't have to be heterosexual, but the point being that for one person within the context of the relationship who is more in touch with their feminine aspects, they're going to see an arising shadow that plays out with in an arising patriarchal context. And we know what that is. We don't have to state that here, but interpersonally, we know what that looks like. And I'm not referring to necessarily physical violence, physical abuse. We're talking about just kind of a low grade and chronic context of rebuking, shaming, scolding, invalidating, and gaslighting. And those dynamics, whether it's just a low grade in a work environment or interpersonally, in relationships, in communities, in nation states, as that arises, then it behooves those who are looking at their own shadows to keep going with the process, even in a more challenging environment. So worldwide, there are many women in countries who are not, who are more ensconced in a community of a patriarchy than we are, for example. And so those women, and women even in this country, and from the women that I'm speaking to, and the men also, this is a very common dynamic. That even best friends, families, siblings, parents, children, they don't know that there can be intimacy abuse in relationships because it's not spoken about. We don't talk about it because in our make it a great day culture, in our you can manifest anything you want culture, if it's not extremely healthy, you're supposed to leave a relationship. But the reality is that many women around the world are in contexts of relationships where they have dependent children, dependent elders, dependent family members, or other dynamics, even with respect to the laws in their countries, where they don't leave, they're not able to leave. And so what do we do if we're living in a community, in a nation, in a country, or in a marriage where there is some aspect of chronic low-grade intimacy abuse, and how do we then continue to deal and arise and encourage our own shadow to be cleared in the context of the opposite? And that really is the work of a lifetime. And this is the work that we have set out to accomplish. And I know that we can accomplish it.
Thank you. This is a question I came up with, and I was just curious to see if anyone had any experience with this. But in what ways have you seen in yourself or others misunderstanding or avoidance of the feminine aspect hinder people's ability to recognize their true nature, to wake up, to whatever? Again, avoidance of the feminine aspect, misunderstanding of the feminine aspect, or just overlooking it. Have you seen that play into people's challenges with actually waking up or recognizing their true nature or embodying it?
So maybe I'll start by just saying from a practical perspective, it's something I wish I knew what the terms of masculine approach versus a feminine approach, what they applied to way back when I was starting out 20 some years ago, because I just didn't come across it stated that way. And for maybe a decade and a half was really taking, the kind of the classical masculine approach of formal meditation and a lot of, let's call it like the appearance of effort was very much part of my path. And I didn't really understand there was such a thing as a feminine approach, which is, I would say, the way I try to explain it to people is, if you think about a mother with a newborn baby and just gazing at the newborn with total unconditional love and acceptance and interest, right? Interest is important. And you think of that, but is applied to your own immediate experience. That's basically the best way I can kind of describe it. Just to have that unconditional love and interest. And for me, like, it was kind of like the balancing of the two were very important. I had to have both. And eventually, well, as you go deeper into non-dual realization, it just obliterates all understanding of that.
Beautiful. Chelsea, did you have anything to say, or?
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of the work I do with folks in a mentorship spiritual realm is kind of in this area, and even more so probably post-awakening of, and maybe part of it is like that the traditional paths were very often created from a masculine perspective of like using the mind to understand practices and using texts to study and make sure you're doing it right, but then we kind of get in the mind about it, which isn't a bad thing. But I see a lot of folks getting caught up in trying to awaken, like, and I think that's what we were kind of talking about earlier. Of like, awakening doesn't just happen and you're free. Like, you're in a body, in this body, until this body dies, and you're in a world full of people that will never, realize their true nature, and that the suffering that comes with being human, even when we're free, in a certain sense, like, we still feel pain, we still have challenges, like, we still are vulnerable to emotions, and so there can be this kind of like discomfort with the feminine aspects of just the humility of being human, of like having big feelings, having a body with imperfections, quote unquote. And I think people are afraid of, on the other side, like feminine power. Like, there's a lot of power in that, and I see people who have a lot of access to it and push it away. So that's all that wants to be said, I think.
I love that. The mistrust of the feminine power, feminine aspect. There's something, I'll just share something, and maybe this will spur other responses, but there's something about the feminine aspect in the way that it transmits to me that's really, really obvious. So for instance, this is like a vulnerable share. 10 years ago or so, I spent a couple days around Lisa, met her in person, and I had never been around anybody, I don't think, who went through what I went through. But she moved with so much feminine energy, like it just changed so much for me. Like, it energetically changed things, and it unfolded for a long time. And it wasn't anything specific like that she said. It wasn't a specific teaching. It was literally just being in the vicinity of the way she moves and her energetics. And so I've really tried to encourage people to interact with female facilitators. I try to refer people to one-on-ones, and it's just such a powerful way of transmitting, and it's empathic, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if anyone else has this understanding or experience, but it's also, strangely, it's very efficient in a way. I would say the transmission is just so full on, and you just absorb it so readily. Hey, Barb, did you have any thoughts on the matter?
There I am. There, with all that unmuting, I totally lost the question.
Well, I was just curious if you had any insight into the sort of transmission of the feminine aspect, how that feminine energy, well, at least in my description just a moment ago, is how it seems to transmit directly, not through a teaching, not through words, not through practice, but rather directly. And or what Chelsea mentioned, that it's actually daunting. The energy itself is actually so powerful that without realizing, we can be afraid of it. I think that's very common, actually. Very, very
Yes.
common for people to be afraid of it. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I think we are afraid of it because we've been conditioned to be strong and assertive and make your way in the world and get what you need, gain and gain and gain, when in actuality it's completely opposite. It's things moving away, subtracting from the ideas that you have about yourself. So that yielding, accepting, being overwhelmed doesn't fit with the conditioning very well sometimes. But it is actually the way of expansion and love and all of that.
Thank you.
Maybe I could add something. I think at times it's the immensity of it that can be terrifying. It can be so powerful that it's just obliterates.
Well said.
Yeah, it's such an interesting area, this. That feminine expression of this subject. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, like we've said, through a female form. But there's this interesting element that can happen when it is maybe through a female form. Like it's such a different way of communicating in a way. But yet maybe that's not noticed. Like I'm just thinking about Ananda Mahima, this lady, this Indian saint, who she's so insanely beautiful. She's been dead since I think 1981. But if you just look at a picture of her, and I sometimes show the picture to people that aren't into this subject at all, but it's so interesting just looking at the picture of her, like the effect and the energy in which she embodies. And it's such a different way of teaching, and it's so silent and unspoken. Yeah, and you can't really communicate it. Yeah, I don't know how to. But it's really interesting to try and discuss it, like this aspect, this feminine way of teaching that's totally energetic and it's divine. Yeah, I don't know how to even continue communicating about it.
Yeah, just listening to you talk, I feel it. And it's divine is a great word for it. It's so full. Also seems to have an intelligence of some sort, like not a cognitive intelligence. Like it knows exactly where to go to find the place, the hurt or whatever needs to be seen is just seen. And it's so simple. Love. Okay. This question actually came from ChatGPT. How does the approach of or concept of surrender play a role in non-dual clarity or an awakening? And do you consider it a feminine aspect or a feminine approach? Surrender.
I think it's also kind of responding to Lisa's share of just what was coming up for me. I don't even know what you were saying, Lisa, but pointing to the feminine power of birth. And I don't mean just that women can have birth, like anyone can give birth. And here, like the actual process of laboring and giving birth to a child, like it wasn't my awakening experience, but like if nothing else in my life was like that, the power in that moment and the realization of like that wouldn't happen without surrender. It's this like, but life is like forcing you to surrender in that moment to allow more life to come through. I don't know how to put words to it, but as we're talking about the feminine aspect, like, there's just this like awareness of like birth being a big part of that, and how that maybe in the masculine like contemporary culture we like get the forceps out and try to like force it to happen, but like naturally it's surrender to the power of the form that already knows exactly what it needs to do. And that translates to anything, like whether you're birthing a project or birthing a relationship or birthing your life. It's I think surrender can be really misunderstood, and I think that's a part of the feminine that's been repressed and made to seem weak and belittled. And that's actually the part that I think people fear, is that when we really access surrender, how powerful it is. And like there's this metaphor in trauma therapy where you have a tight fist, and if you try to like grab the fist open, the fist just wants to get tighter. But if you support it underneath, the fist just unfolds and unravels. And like unilaterally, when we're present to that energy, it transforms us, and just the power of that.
Beautifully stated. Yeah, you can feel it. Does anyone else have anything they wanted to say about surrender?
I do. I feel like surrender has always been a word that has just set off the conditioning, because I can always hear no. I'll never surrender. But when I changed that, when I saw, oh, they don't mean that, they mean just opening, and it makes such difference to me, just the changing of that word to more reflect of what the feeling is. To me, it's not surrender how I was conditioned to see it. It was just opening, allowing the opening, and regardless of what happens, even though the thoughts are saying, oh my God, I'm going in, I'll probably fly into oblivion, I might die right here, all that. And just opening.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I agree with what Barb is saying there. It's this shift from what the culture says is surrendering is giving up, when, of course, in essence, it's giving in, it's letting go. It's about becoming aware of how the mind is most comfortable preferring to manage and direct and navigate and coerce and plan. And perhaps if there is a feminine aspect at all, it's about just letting go of this idea that the mind knows the way forward. Sometimes it's just, it doesn't know at all. If I guess it was Carl Jung who originally brought the concept of archetypes into modern psychology, although I guess he described them as primarily psychological principles. And of course, the scientific community just summarily dismisses this whole idea of archetypes within the context of the scientific establishment. And yet the archetype of letting go, whether if that's feminine, then maybe it is, but this idea of letting go and surrendering to the now of this moment, as the process of clearing the shadow arises, because that really is the heart of the matter, is allowing the shadow day in and day out, and day in and month out, and week in and year out, to continue to arise and to be cleared through all of the tools that we can use to do so. This goes hand in hand, clearing the shadow with letting go.
Thank you.
Maybe I can add something to that, since we're talking about surrender. Occasionally I get this question about free will, doership. What do I do about that feeling of doership? And I think that this is something that people start to really fixate on that, it's like they're looking constantly for the evidence of, oh yes, that sense of doership is still here. Oh, it's still here. They get really triggered by it. And what I would say about it, first of all, try not to worry about it, number one. It does tend to resolve on its own. But my teacher, Gary Weber, gave me an amazing pointer, which I really contemplated this for some time. And that pointer was, notice the absence of doership. Things are just happening. And then just, repeating that to myself, just kind of like dropping it in as I went about my day, is confirming what's actually already the case, rather than going, oh yeah, that sense of doership is still here. What am I going to do about that problem?
Love it. Yeah. And I think that does kind of point to the feminine aspect. It's like, instead of trying to create something or look for something or find something or hunt it down, it's like, see what's already happening. Just fully embrace what's already clearly the case. And it's just obvious. I think something Chelsea said brought me another question, and that was, we've touched on that feminine aspect, and that the fear can arise from the power of it. I guess I wanted to ask if anyone has a response to this. How do you know when you're in your strength from that aspect? Like, how does it feel to you when you move from or through the feminine aspect with strength? Sort of, let's just say alignment. And that may mean alignment where the feminine aspect is sort of prominent, but there's also the masculine in balance with it. How does that feel to you, or how could you relate that to somebody who is curious about that, or maybe just trying to find that in themselves?
For me, it was an experience immediately of, and of course, initially, it's the contrast that is so noticeable, and then eventually it becomes ordinary. But early on, for me, as awakening got underway, it was noticing that there was just something different, something else looking out through the eyes. Whatever was there before wasn't there anymore, looking out through the eyes. So it was a very palpable shift in a sense of awareness encompassing everything, rather than almost a mental process prior to that.
Thank you.
I think it feels like more of a merging of those two, and still as it kind of like different sides show up and different sides release, and another one shows up, and it may be more feminine or it may be more masculine, and it's all good.
That's my experience as well. How does it feel, or how do you know when you're sort of moving from the feminine aspect? Maybe you are all the time, I don't know. And you feel strength in that movement, power in that movement, and you're embodying that, aligned with it.
It feels really like a complex question to answer. Like, because there could be like many different positions that you answer it from. So the one that most naturally comes to me to answer is from like a more absolute position. And for me, it's like similar to what Lisette said. It's like a meeting of like the emptiness and the fullness. So, or the movement back from mind activity or the world to this, that which is looking, which isn't personal, which isn't a position, which isn't a place. And so when there is a movement back to that, you're also merging with everything, so with the being. And that is what the feminine feels like to me, I think. Like on the human level, there could be a different answer of what the feminine feels like. That maybe be more on like the chakras or the feelings in the body. on like my real heart level, it's like where the emptiness and the fullness meet, where they come together.
Thank you. Okay, someone has a question here. Monica. It is, how does surrender differ for those who are embodied in a female body? It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. We only have female bodies to ask the question of, other than me, but could you maybe re-ask it a different way or something? I think I get what you're asking, but I just want to make sure I'm asking the right question. This is a good question. A bit more of like down and dirty practical question. This is from Teresa. There are more male non-dual teachers than female teachers, and they tend to have much larger followings. Does that relate in any way to our discussion today? Is it a problem?
I'd like to hit on that one.
Hit us.
Well, from my perspective, if people worldwide today are actively aware of and wanting to work to uncover and release their shadow and move in the direction of what we're calling so-called awakening. If this is a movement that's happening within us, and if life is always supporting this movement, then what would that look like? Well, we already know that in order to move in that direction, we're looking at facing all of the heretofore suppressed false ideas, fixations, false beliefs. So what are those? How do those show up? Well, how those show up is through the dynamics of interpersonal relationships, mainly. And so along the road of incarnational experience, any disordered relationship in the existence of our soul, if it has to be seen through, and if this is the lifetime that we're wanting to see through them, well, then we're going to be incarnating back into those experiences, because if everything has to be seen through, it has to be re-experienced. And we're re-experiencing in the context of a patriarchy, right? So if that's all happening together, we're in a patriarchal society. We're re-experiencing by our own soul's choice. These are not, these are very conscious choices from the perspective of our soul. We're wanting to experience those disordered relationships from the past in order to clear the shadow and move it through. So these are potent times. We're in relationships that are triggering us. We're in relationships that are activating our shadow. And normally with that in the context of society, or even in sometimes traditional psychotherapeutic contexts, it's, well, get the hell out quickly. If you're not getting your needs met, get the heck out, right? But in the context of awakening, if life somehow is serving up a context that lets us become aware of what is activating us, then these are holy relationships. Those contexts that seem to be most disordered, even ones that are filled with, as I touched on before, rebuking, scolding, invalidating, little gaslighting thrown in, those are activating us. And so they become disordered relationships which are bringing us order. It's one of the great paradoxes of our time, even in our communities. It's a great paradox, and yet they're so powerful. And so when we notice that, even in the context of businesses, why are so many CEOs male and not so many females? Well, we're in a patriarchy right now. And yet it affords us wonderful opportunities because we're getting activated and triggered left, right, and center. If we're looking to use that activation and to clear it once and for all.
Thank you. Well said. Does anyone else want to address that question? I'll repeat it. There are more non-dual teachers. There are more male non-dual teachers than female teachers. They tend to have much larger followings. Does that relate to our discussion today, and is it a problem? Or I'll add another angle. Was that problematic for any of you, like early on? Did it seem strange, or like something was missing, or you wish there were more female teachers, or?
I see things happening as change. I would say, yes, I would. I think there are certainly more male non-dual teachers. It feels like that's just been the way that it's been. But now there is a change happening, and it is that we are finding more truth in feeling and emotion and the things that we ran from all of our lives, standing there and not running and getting to see what's underneath that and what's actually being given in that moment is tremendous. And I think that's something that maybe the feminine aspect, as you're defining it, makes people in a feminine form be more relating to those feelings, perhaps.
Thank you.
I don't know how to say this because I've never said it before. But there's something, what I find really interesting is I noticed that there's a lot more male spiritual teachers, and they're a lot more famous. But I also think that the biggest audience of spirituality is women. And I find that really fascinating, like, because it's also like the way us women see femininity and see the transfer or resonance with this message, like the way that we've maybe been taught that we have to listen to the masculine, or we have to listen to the masculine energy, and then dismissing it in ourselves, and then also in female teachers. So we're afraid of our own femininity. So then when we see it in female teachers, then the females are afraid of that as well. So I find it, I'm pretty sure that the audience of spirituality is larger in females. But I don't know. I've never done a survey on that. So it's interesting, like also what's in us as females to not want to go to female teachers. Is it, and if we are attracted to female teachers, are we attracted to female teachers that teach in a very masculine way? Or I find it interesting to reflect on, but it's also quite controversial, and I might be really wrong that it might be equally spread amongst the genders, the audience.
Thank you.
And I would have loved more female teachers, but I would have also been insanely scared of them as well. I felt like the feminine aspect kind of made me lose control a bit. Like in my spiritual thinking, it was like I would just like run into the fire or something. It was a bit scary as well.
Well, I want to reflect on that. It's so funny. Like sometimes if you look on online forums about awakening and non-duality, like Reddit and stuff, it's a very masculine thing to say, like, well, what's the most direct approach? Always talking about the direct approach and the different traditions that have direct approaches, Mahamudra, Dzogchen. But in my experience, the most direct approach is being in the vicinity of feminine energy that's awake. That is, in my opinion, hands down the most direct approach, if you can handle it. But it will burn you up in a way too, just as you said. Like you can feel the power of it, and so maybe it's like, oh, you get a little bit of it, and you're like, oh, let me go back and practice for a while. Let me go meditate for another 10 years. It's like, okay. Did anyone else want to speak on that? I have another question, or a rephrased question from Monica.
I'd say one thing, if the words want to come out, in that I think I don't know if it's a problem that there's less female teachers than men. I think to what we're talking about, like there's a acceptance of this as the world we live in and the history that's brought us to this point. But I think here, like Awakening, it really brought to light how much I repressed my femininity. That was the biggest, like, wow, to feel free of that, to feel like I can not play small, to feel like I can speak my voice, to feel like I don't need my appearance to be the main thing that I'm providing, or being nice or taking care of someone, that I can really like access that power. Felt like I really realized how much conditioning had been put on me. It was like stepping back and seeing the world differently, of like all the message that I got that made me small. And so I think I see on my channel when I trigger people and when it's because I'm not meeting that conditioning in a way that is a barrier that someone who's masculine wouldn't have. And so I don't know if that impacts anything specifically, but it is a reality, and certainly people come across me who know nothing about awakening, and they're not looking for what I'm offering. But that's been a really interesting part of this experience. So I'd be curious how it evolves and changes over time.
Yeah, I just for the audience, like everyone on this panel, I would hold out as a very, very potent teacher. Not everybody's open to new students or works one-on-one necessarily, but everyone here I've referred people to in various ways. And I almost feel like I've told Chelsea this, like I'm always like worried I'm going to give you too many people and fill you up, and like I won't have that resource, you know. But I wish there were, I don't think it's a problem. It is what it is. But I really wish there were more, and I think there are more and more prominent female speakers, facilitator, teachers, just because it's such a powerful transmission. Now, Chelsea, you mentioned some people get triggered by what you say. It may not have anything to do with being female or feminine energy or anything, or it may. I'm curious what your experience with that is. Like, what kinds of things do you think are challenging for people watching your content? And I would actually be curious what Lisa has to say, because she's told me years ago, she told me some things did trigger people early on. I don't know if they still do or not.
Yeah, for myself, I think the silence, like, because I don't have a script. At least the videos I make now, I don't know what's going to come up, and there's space for it, and so silence triggers people. And yeah, I mean, there's just to be transparent, there's comments that are filtered out that I used to not. I'm not good with technology. I used to not know how to filter them out, and like very sexually violent comments towards me, just by the nature of being a woman, speaking and being in my power. That there's a fear of that. I don't know what specifically those people were responding to, and I'm not going to use the energy to get in. I know that's coming from a place of suffering and not having access to that in themselves. There's something that I've been surprised on the collective of, and part of it too is probably the algorithm of like how our culture has generated what gets attention and what you look like, and you know, who even comes across your page. So yeah, that's all I've got on that.
I was surprised as well, starting my channel, how I don't know, just derogatory some comments are. It's like amazing what people will say when they're speaking publicly with, I guess, an anonymous username. But yeah. Lisa, did you want to add to that? Certainly don't have to.
And it's similar, like it's got better over the years as I've got older. And I think as maybe it's more censored, the comments, but just, yeah, most of my like negative comments come from like very like sexually violent comments. So I don't really get too many negative. I get negative comments sometimes on like being silent for long periods, or maybe on the way in which I speak. I tend to be more, a specific way of speaking, but not so much. Most of it is sexually violent comments. But it's better now because I think YouTube is better at filtering them out, and you're more identifiable. Yeah. And I think that most probably really affects women sharing on the internet. That when I shared it with the lady that helps me organize, like her first response is, "How did you ever carry on speaking? Like, how did you?" And so I can imagine that women sharing on the internet, the amount of violent comments they get. Which is really, really sad. And it's affected me on a personal level. Like I've seen over 12 years now of being on YouTube. I know that it's affected me. And it's hard to say the ways because it's been like over so many years, but it's affected the way I share. And I wouldn't say, and maybe the interaction I have with people as well.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that. You share so openly and from such a place of just total authenticity and vulnerability. And I think, unfortunately, some people actually are triggered to cause harm based on seeing vulnerability, which probably is fear of their own or whatever. But okay, this is the question from Monica. How does gender and or sex, but she's defining that as male, female, play into the experience of letting go or surrender? From an ultimate level, it might not, but I'm interested in the relative aspect of being a woman during this awakening process. So the gender aspect itself, how did that play into the process for you?
In my own experience, because if you look at the historical record of women in societies from the beginning of time, it has been patriarchal environment. And so if you consider the soul's record from a purely experiential perspective, if we're holding all of those experiences within our soul memory, then we have, for the majority of our entire soul's history, we're incarnating into experiences within the context of a patriarchy. Now, certainly, ideally, as the soul matures, we're balancing out the incarnations between female and male. But initially, many souls are most comfortable with one of those. So let's just take women who are in their soul's history have predominantly incarnated as a female. Well, the soul memory of behaving and existing and operating within a patriarchal environment is going to be a very conditioned experience. And interestingly enough, decades ago, when I was having near-death experiences, and they weren't as a result of a physiological trauma, they were somehow related to an opening into this second sight, if you will, seeing beyond the veil, if you will. And so when I was going somehow, I don't know how, into this place into the interlife where souls go after the body is transitioned, it's fascinating that the council, the elders who appear and review with us our soul's experiences and help us with our lessons, they're predominantly showing up in our view as men. And it's not because there's any advantage from the perspective of a man awakening, but from the total incarnated history, we're accustomed within a patriarchy to see men as authority figures. And so we have a long history of that. And it's conditioned comprehension of, well, on planet Earth anyway, the majority of authority figures has been up until this point men. So I forgot what the question was, but this idea that we're all existing with what we have been existing in for eons of time, and particularly in the lifetimes now with women, looking at disordered relationships that we have wanted to wait until we've had more soul development to address. Because the really difficult ones, we have wanted to wait until we had as much soul maturity as we could until we address those. So these ones are going to be the most potent from our incarnated life histories. Imagine that. The ones that we are now in and beholding are some of the ones that we have wanted to put off until now. And if we are not brand new souls, and by the way, how do we know a soul's relative age? Well, it's pretty simple. Those who exhibit and demonstrate generosity of spirit towards others, not money, it's not about money or finances, but generosity of spirit towards others in their actions and daily behaviors, usually have a greater soul development than somebody who does not. And so this is why these times and relationships are so potent and powerful now, because we're awakening within this context.
Thank you. I have a question for anyone or everyone. In my experience, one of the most poignant aspects of recognizing feminine energy here was learning what intuition really is and how to trust it. Not suggesting that intuition is only a feminine quality, but I'm curious what anyone here would say, because I do get this question a lot, to someone who is trying to learn to trust their own intuition, trying to get in touch with their own intuition, trying to even identify their own intuition. What might you say to them, or how would you point for that kind of a question or concern?
It seems to me intuition plays a huge role in this, and that as you begin to hear it, when the mind gets still, the sound of the intuition, the knowledge of the intuition comes forward, and eventually there becomes trust, and you understand that's guidance, that's the real thing coming forward to move what's happening. And so I think if people could figure out how to find that in themselves, there is something that is always moving you in the right direction with intuition. It's just that we don't trust it in any way in our conditioned selves. So again, it's opening to that still small voice that's telling, giving direction.
Thank you, Barb. Or the question could even just be, what is intuition for you?
Intuition is what life is doing. Period, full stop.
Love it. Love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's such a great answer.
Chelsea, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I would just say look in the body. And I don't exclude the mind from that, but there's a reason why the expression, what does your gut tell you? And yeah, sometimes we look for the mind and exclude the body, but here the intuition is very, very clear in the mind, in the body, even when things are unclear, or uncertain, or there's not an answer, the tuning that. And that, I don't know if you would divide intuition and embodiment in feminine and the mind and, intellect into masculine, but yeah, I would lean towards embodiment for that myself.
Thank you.
I might add that for a lot of people, maybe the background constant is kind of a feeling of doubt, and that doubt has an energetic signature of its own. And then if we contrast that to intuition, I would agree with Chelsea. it's looking to the body, not to thought. And at times it can actually have like this feeling that maybe we've all known in childhood, like that feeling of inspiration. Like, what if, what if I try this? What if I go on a retreat? Where does that come from? It's not coming from doubt.
Mm-hmm. Can you say more about the feeling tone of that distinction?
Yeah. I think it has an energetic quality of itself, as again, like it has a clear contrast to the energetics of doubt. So I might say that it has like a little bit of a sparkly quality to it, something like that.
Maybe innocence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, childlike maybe.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Love it. Great answer. Monica has rephrased her question. She said, "Thank you, Lisette. That did not quite answer my question. I was asking, and this, of course, is for everyone, not just Lisette, but I was asking about the body aspect of awakening, bodily aspect, like periods, boobs, bearing children. How does having a woman's body impact our own perception and approach to awakening? I don't feel this is talked about. I feel that I need more rest as a woman. For example, just curious about your experience as women or female femme teachers." Like almost like physiologic or anatomical differences.
Oh, I understand your question now. Oh, wow. For me, this was an explosive, and continues to be, explosively physiological. So yes, I have had to sleep when I need to sleep during the day, even if it's to excuse myself and go into quiet. There have been explosions in changes of physiological perceptions, meaning the eyes perceive completely different, with everything is pixelated and shimmering, and even in the feeling nature, it has felt like a transition from, and by the way, this is after the period of the dropping away of self occurs, because during that period alone, there's a particularly that was particularly challenging, in as much as the false self falls away, this kind of bubbling up of existential terror arises. Because remember, we had talked about before how in this one point does the mind properly comprehend. As it's falling away, there's a sense of there's dying happening, that there's annihilation occurring, and there is. But this is good news, because the false self is falling away. But after that phase completes itself, the existential terror is resolved, the feeling of annihilation and completion is moved through. For me, the physiological aspects were explosively, on the one hand, fascinating, surprising, navigating the body with respect to surges of energy, surges of heat, surges of cold, needing to sleep when nobody else was sleeping, needing to awaken in the night when nobody else was awake. So for me personally, yes, it has been an extraordinary experience of physiological shifts, changes, sensitivities, emerging, and most particularly, this beautiful, wonderful cohesiveness, a recognition that every single particle of everything is completely conjoined. So everything is happening to everything, and everything is connected to everything. We kind of hear people saying, oh, there's this feeling of everything is one and oneness. But what does that really mean? In my own experience, it's this comprehension and recognition that everything affects everything, affects everything, affects everything, on into eternity. And it's beautiful because when we recognize the cohesiveness and the purity of our every moment of experience, that's when we really trust in life. And it also refers to the previous question, which is, what is intuition? And somebody had said, I only saw a piece of the comment, which is I don't really understand what is, that doesn't answer the question, that intuition is life. But if you feel into that question and the answer, don't think about it. Just feel, what does that feel like if life now is informing this idea of intuition instead of mental processes informing decisions? It's completely different. It feels different. It has a different quality to it. There's a sense of, wow, what will happen next with life? What is the next step according to what life, how life is moving me? So this is, for me, was a qualitative and quantitative shift.
Thank you. There was a question up here I might rephrase slightly because I was also curious about this. It says, what direction do you have for a man who has difficulty getting in touch with his feminine side? Well, that's actually a good question, just as stated. This is from Barry. The way I was going to restate it, and you can answer either way or say whatever you want, but I was going to restate it that I find sometimes people are so in the masculine early on in realization. It's a very mental process. It's cognitive. They're trying to understand all the doctrine, and they're learning cognitively, conceptually, all the stuff everyone's saying, trying to synthesize it and put it together. But they're not waking up. They're not really dropping in. It's like almost creating a better story or something. And I think we've all encountered people like that. If you encounter someone like that, how do you work with them? What do you say to them, or what do you want to say to them? And or what do you want to say to this question? What do you say to a man who just can't get in touch with his feminine side? That's a good question.
I would say Tantra, Bhakti, or somatic work. Yeah.
Tantra, Bhakti, or somatic.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I would say return to the body, return to the senses. I don't think that it is specifically a feminine aspect to be able to access that.
I agree.
From my perspective, I would say that all non-ideal states of experience, if you will, or perspectives are only blocked by one thing. It's just unmet shadow. So when the shadow is uncovered, and this is the work, this is the grueling in the trenches responsibility that we all take on. But when that occurs, and it happens regularly, and it can't be done in a day or a weekend, we just keep going and keep going. But as the shadow is unearthed and excavated, and life will always show us how to do that. And what is arising in the moment, that's what we handle in the moment. But as the shadow is rising and we release it, well, isn't that strange? Everything just seems to happen naturally. All of our natural abilities arise. All of our so-called aspects of greater ability and development arise. So really, whatever so-called problem seems to be stopping us from awakening, we just continue to look at what false identifications we have, what false illusions are we operating with, and that really just comes from a willingness to uncover it and an intention to do the uncomfortable work, and getting comfortable with discomfort day in and day out.
Thank you. Comfortable with discomfort. Love it. Anyone else? I guess Chelsea or maybe Chris hadn't answered that, if you want to.
Yeah, I might add that for somebody that's really kind of like lost in trying to understand it, I would point them to orienting their attention to what's in their experience that's non-conceptual. And this is a difficult thing for the mind. The mind doesn't know what to do with that. But ultimately, that's where realization takes place. And if the mind says, this is boring, I don't see anything, then I would suggest, can you connect to this felt sense of devotion? Devotion to what? Devotion to the process itself, even if you don't know where this is going. But, it's kind of like a combination of faith and devotion put together.
I love it. Great answer. This is a good question here. It says, can an overemphasis of the feminine aspect or feminine qualities of awakening sometimes be an impediment?
I might say yes. I think sometimes people can get lost in a fantasy. That the fantasy being that there's nothing to do. That realization will just simply take care of itself, and you don't need to do anything. And that there's going to be some end point at which everything will just kind of like suddenly come to an end. And like this is a fantasy. I had it too, so I understand it. But in my case, and just about everybody that I know, it did require some continued effort, some willingness to do the shadow work, look at the behavior of the mind, look at the conditioned patterns, and it took a lot of work for me, So, but yes, it's just recognizing how that effort meets surrender, how they come together, and there really is no end point. It's infinite.
If the so-called Tao is the middle way, it's just the middle way, there's not this extreme and there's not that extreme, then any overemphasis, no matter what it is, any underemphasis, any overemphasis then could be considered to be a self-delusion, right? Or a false perception. And so once again, we're dealing with, well, having all of those false illusions and delusions and false sense of self arise so that we can look at them. And how we do that is through all the tools of awakening that we've been shown are available to us.
Thank you. Again, the question, if anyone else wants to say anything, was, can there be an overemphasis on the feminine aspect? Can that be problematic for awakening or just an imbalance in general?
Yeah, I would just add that I think that's where like spiritual bypassing can come in as just a misunderstanding of feminine openness, acceptance as being a passive thing, or love as being permissive of ignorance or delusion or suffering. But that, true femininity, whatever that means, to me, it feels like very powerful, very active, very fluid, dynamic, not ever just one thing, but it has all the qualities of surrender and also opening to being assertive, asserting love and receiving it at the same time. So I think it's just on either masculine or feminine, being too over-identified is just a misunderstanding of what those qualities are actually reflective of. I
agree with you 100%. I love that. That's exactly my experience, is when the feminine aspect is very clear, it becomes pretty seamless from the masculine aspect and vice versa. But what can make them stand out is a misunderstanding or misinterpretation or misapplication. Yeah. Did anyone else want to add to that?
That seems like getting stuck in identity again, in terms of that I feel that I must present myself as feminine or masculine when in actuality it's a combination.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, we are getting close to the end. I mean, I can't even believe it's been almost 2 hours. Wow. So I feel like we just got started or something. Does anyone on the panel have any thing they want to say, any questions for any of the other panelists, or just anything you want to say to the public about this topic or not about this topic? Feel free.
This has been very fun getting to meet all of these people in person, so to speak. Yeah, to get the flavor. It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Barb.
Thanks. And I would say it's enjoyable. It's exciting. It's an adventure. It's not at all like sometimes in the teachings it sounds like, well, if I go through enough suffering, perhaps I'll make it. It's not that at all. It's upside down. It's like, whoa, life, aliveness.
I love how simple and direct you are about this stuff.
Good. That's how it feels. And as you know, it's been words for me that words went away at first and I couldn't speak. So now the speaking still feels like I just want to find the most blunt, direct way to say it.
Yeah, for anyone watching, so Barb, she was on she was in my founders group, and I was just, I don't know, a couple of meetings I was speaking, and I kept noticing her there. There's like 20 people or however many people. I just kept noticing her, and the transmission was so powerful. She wasn't even saying anything. She wasn't talking. And I just could tell. I could totally tell. And finally, I started talking to her and invited her to do a Q&A at one of our retreats and so forth. And it's just obvious the transmission's just so simple, direct, powerful, and wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very interested in nonverbal communication. So if people have anything to say about that, I'd love to hear it.
Any other closing thoughts or impressions?
Just thank you, Angelo. Thank you for the opportunity to share together and for everybody who came to listen.
Thank you, Lisette.
Yeah, thanks. It's really beautiful to share with you all and get to know you a bit better.
Thanks for being here, Lisa.
And to hear all your perspectives, like such wisdom, it was really beautiful. It's a bit hard to stay focused on the question, just absorbed in the person that's speaking before you.
Yeah, I would echo all that and just feel called to speak from like the community of people that I work with, which is both in non-dual process, but also just therapy, people who have known nothing about awakening, that there's what I'm observing a lot of suffering around femininity right now, just in this point in history in our world. And it feels really just enlivening to be in a panel of women and in that sense of power together. And Angelo, you just like your feminine aspects as well contributing to this and making this a space and valuing it, and just the appreciation for that so much.
It's my pleasure. Chris, any final thoughts?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Angelo, for coming up with this idea and putting this panel together. And beyond that, everything you're doing. Huge thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, thank you all so much. Hopefully we'll have other types of conversations like this in the future, one way or another. I will, for anyone watching this who's interested in resources of any of the panelists, I think everybody has some resources for sure. And so I will have, if you look at the description under this video, you're going to see links to either web pages or the channel page for YouTube or books. So everybody here has something. And if you're interested in either contacting, some do one-on-one, some don't, but you can find videos. Chelsea has wonderful videos. Lisa has years of videos that you can find on YouTube, and they're all very powerful transmissions, especially the silence and all of that. So please utilize these resources. And thank you all again so much. It's been a pleasure.